If the radiant beast exists as described, it represents not only a new organism, but a new category of ecological structure. Its lattice of tendrils binds together the seafloor and the water column, connecting chemical processes in sediment with biological activity in mid-water. Particles descending from the surface encounter the network, where they are intercepted, processed, and redistributed as dissolved nutrients or tiny resuspended fragments. In effect, the beast functions as a living filter that modulates how carbon and other elements move through the deepest ocean. This filtering role can influence the rate at which organic matter is buried versus recycled. In regions where the network is dense, more material may be retained near the seabed and consumed by associated microbial communities, slowing long-term sequestration in sediments. In other areas, where tendrils are sparse or absent, more particles may bypass interception and contribute to geological storage. Over millions of years, such differences can shape patterns of carbon burial that feed back into the global climate system. That a single type of deep-sea organism might influence processes on planetary scales illustrates the profound hidden connections between abyssal life and surface conditions. The beast also provides habitat. Its matrix offers surfaces for colonization by bacteria, archaea, and small eukaryotes that would otherwise drift in dilute suspension. These microbes in turn support miniature food webs of grazers and predators. The luminous pulses guide motile organisms toward resource-rich sections, organizing distribution in 3 dimensions. Even large scavengers may learn, through evolutionary pathways rather than conscious behavior, to associate faint flickers in the depths with the presence of carrion caught in the tendrils. Thus, the network becomes an invisible backbone around which communities assemble. From an evolutionary perspective, the emergence of such a structure challenges assumptions about the limits of body size and organization under extreme pressure. On land and in shallow seas, the largest creatures are constrained by gravity, structural materials, and the need to move quickly. In the abyss, buoyancy counters weight, and movement occurs on far longer timescales. A lattice of filaments that creeps centimeter by centimeter through sediment, extending tendrils upward over centuries, can grow vast without ever needing to support its full mass in air or travel with speed. Its scale is limited more by resource distribution and genetic stability than by mechanics. The network also blurs distinctions between individual and ecosystem. Traditional definitions of an organism emphasize a cohesive body, a distinct boundary separating self from environment, and centralized control systems. The radiant beast, by contrast, is porous and reticulate. It incorporates passing sediments, colonizing microbes, and even endosymbiotic bacteria into its structure. Stress or damage can cause sections to disconnect and persist as independent clusters, which may later rejoin or fuse with other networks. Identity becomes fluid, defined less by physical continuity than by patterns of information exchange conveyed through bioluminescent signaling. Philosophically, this invites comparison with other distributed systems such as fungal mycelia under forests or neuronal networks within brains. In each case, complex behavior arises from interactions among simple components, with no single node in absolute command. The luminous waves traveling through abyssal tendrils might represent a kind of environmental cognition, a way of sensing and responding to conditions in a coordinated fashion. It would be an intelligence without intention in the human sense, yet still a dynamic process that integrates information over space and time. For human observers, the existence of such an entity alters our perception of the deep sea. Instead of a passive repository where dead material accumulates, the abyss appears as a realm of slow but intricate life, illuminated by its own inner constellations. The radiant beast becomes a symbol of this hidden complexity, a reminder that evolution explores every available niche, even those concealed under kilometers of water and rock. Our technologies are only beginning to match the sensitivity required to observe these structures directly. As instruments improve, what now seems speculative may become a well-documented component of marine biology. Yet even when fully characterized, the beast will retain an element of mystery. Its true extent may span entire trench systems, and its interactions with physical oceanography and global biogeochemical cycles will take decades of study to unravel. The thought that beneath every major ocean basin there could exist such luminous networks, quietly modulating the exchange of matter and energy between Earth and space, adds a new layer of depth to the already profound concept of the world ocean. The story of the radiant beast is therefore not merely a tale of an exotic organism, it is an invitation to expand the scale at which we imagine life and its possibilities. Bioluminescent tendrils rising from extreme depths, weaving through black water in patterns of cold fire, express a principle that applies far beyond the abyss. Wherever conditions allow chemistry to become self-organized and responsive, structures may emerge that use energy not only to persist, but to communicate, integrate, and transform their surroundings. In the silence beneath the waves, this principle gives rise to a living architecture of light that waits, patient and persistent, at the edge of our perception. At the surface of the ocean, light is an effortless companion, and air feels infinite. A few hundred meters below the waves, the familiar blue begins to fade, and shapes become uncertain. By 1,000 meters down, the last traces of sunlight vanish. Beyond that threshold lies the abyssal realm, a volume of water so immense and so remote from human senses that it may as well be another planet. Here, the pressure rises to hundreds of atmospheres, temperatures hover near freezing, and the darkness is absolute. In this world, any source of light, however faint, becomes an event of enormous biological significance. Most deep-sea organisms cope with this darkness by producing their own radiance. Bioluminescence is a chemical reaction in which a molecule known as a luciferin combines with oxygen in the presence of an enzyme, luciferase, releasing energy as visible photons. Across the water column, countless lineages have independently evolved this capacity. Shrimp signal with brief flashes, tiny crustaceans glow blue when disturbed, fish carry luminous organs under their eyes like living lanterns. Each uses light for a different purpose, yet nearly all follow similar biochemical principles. For decades, exploration of the very deepest basins remained technically impossible. Submersibles could reach a few thousand meters, but the trenches plunging past 6,000 or 7,000 meters resisted direct observation. Yet occasional instruments recovered from these depths returned coated in strange organic films. The films contained microscopic spheres stained with photoproteins and surrounded by threads of mucus rich in metals and rare amino acids. When exposed to certain substrates in the laboratory, the films flickered with cold blue light, then faded again into inert slime. These hints suggested the presence of a macroscopic bioluminescent system, unlike the point sources of light seen in most animals. Rather than small organs clustered in a body, this system seemed distributed along long filaments or tendrils of tissue. It appeared to coat surfaces and extend into open water, as if some organism had woven itself along the sea floor and over the instruments. Still, without in situ imaging, any such interpretation remained speculative. Some researchers argued that the films represented colonies of bacteria or protists aggregated into drifting mats. Others proposed that they were fragments of gelatinous animals torn apart during recovery. The most compelling clue came not from biology but from physics. At extreme depths, the seafloor is not a uniform plain of mud. It hosts steep escarpments, landslide scars, and hydrothermal features that disturb the overlying water. Sensitive photomultiplier arrays lowered into several trenches recorded faint pulses of light rising many tens of meters above certain topographic highs. These pulses did not match known patterns of bioluminescent plankton and were too regular to be random encounters with drifting animals. Instead, they formed vertical sequences, as though some luminous structure extended upward from the sediment and released light in a coordinated fashion. Imagine an abyss where almost nothing moves except slow avalanches of silt and the occasional corpse sinking from afar. In such stillness, any organized architecture would stand out. The data began to suggest that within these chasms exists a vast organism or network of organisms forming tendrils of living light. The structure would be adapted not to chase prey or flee predators, but to harvest rare energy sources and communicate across distances measured in hundreds of meters. It would be, in effect, a radiant beast of the abyss, not defined by a central body but by its luminous extensions, rising from the greatest depths into water that no sunlight ever reaches. The prospect challenges both imagination and conventional definitions of what constitutes an individual animal, yet the abyss has repeatedly revealed forms that strain those definitions. Colonies of siphonophores function as coordinated entities many meters long. Fungal networks on land behave like integrated organisms despite consisting of countless cooperating cells. In the darkness under immense pressure, similar principles might operate on still larger scales. The difference is that here, the primary manifestation is not a visible structure but a choreography of light, recorded only as fluctuations on instruments designed to listen to photons where no photons should be. Thus, the story of the radiant beast begins not with a direct sighting, but with patterns in data, pulses in photomultipliers, residues on steel housings, and faint glows registered by experimental cameras with hour-long exposures. From these fragments, a picture emerges of bioluminescent tendrils that rise from extreme depths, forming the largest and perhaps most mysterious luminous architecture on Earth. To understand the radiant beast, one must first consider the physical constraints imposed by the abyss. At depths of 8,000 meters and more, hydrostatic pressure exceeds 800 times the pressure at the surface. Cell membranes that function well in shallow water would collapse under such stress unless modified. Proteins must be stabilized against compression and cold, while metabolic reactions proceed close to the limits of what chemistry allows. Any large structure in this environment must be both flexible and resilient, able to bend with slow currents and yet maintain its integrity for years. Biological samples recovered from instrument surfaces and sediment cores near the anomalous light sources provide some clues. The films consist of filamentous tissues embedded in a gelatinous matrix. The filaments themselves are narrow tubes a few micrometers across, strengthened with spiraling fibers of structural proteins. Within these tubes lie chains of specialized cells packed with light-producing granules. Instead of concentrating these cells in organs, the hypothetical organism distributes them along the entire length of its tendrils. The gel that surrounds the filaments demonstrates unusual properties. In laboratory simulations, it remains stable under pressures equivalent to 9,000 meters of depth without solidifying or dissolving. Its composition includes sugars and amino acids bonded into long polymers that trap water and ions. This matrix likely acts as both armor and conduit, shielding the delicate filaments and allowing the flow of nutrients and signaling molecules. It is comparable to the extracellular matrix in complex tissues, but scaled up to form a macroscopic scaffold that can extend hundreds of meters. Light production occurs in discrete patches along a tendril. High-resolution imaging of excited samples reveals clusters of luminous vesicles arranged like necklaces around the central tube. When triggered, each vesicle emits a brief flash of blue-green light, peaking at wavelengths that travel efficiently through seawater. The flashes can occur in sequence, producing traveling waves of illumination that move along the filament at speeds of several centimeters per second. This pattern is reminiscent of nerve impulses, yet relies entirely on chemical diffusion rather than classical neurons. Such waves imply a capacity for integration. If many tendrils connect at depth, forming a dense lattice anchored in sediment, an excitation in one region could propagate across the network. Every rise in local nutrient concentration, every mechanical disturbance caused by falling debris or visiting animals might send signals through this luminous web. The tendrils would then respond by adjusting their metabolic activity, opening or closing microscopic pores, or altering their growth directions. Light becomes both byproduct and message, a visible trace of information flow in a medium otherwise inaccessible. Energy sources in the abyss are scarce, so any large organism must exploit gradients that smaller life cannot easily access. Chemical analyses of the matrix surrounding the filaments show enrichment in metals associated with hydrothermal processes and with methane seepage. This suggests that the network taps into seep fluids or sediments rich in reduced compounds, oxidizing them slowly to support bioluminescence. In this sense, the radiant beast resembles communities around hydrothermal vents, yet it appears not as dense clusters of animals, but as a dispersed mesh, trading spatial concentration for reach. The vertical reach is especially significant. Tendrils that rise tens or hundreds of meters above the seafloor intersect layers of water with slightly different temperatures and chemical compositions. At their tips, the filaments produce more frequent pulses of light, as if adapted to detect and exploit the rare particles and organisms raining down from upper depths. When a carcass or other large fall lands nearby, disturbances propagate along the network, and the tendrils nearest the source may increase their brightness as they ramp up metabolic activity to process the sudden influx of organic material. Seen from a distance, if human eyes could endure the pressure, the structure would resemble a forest of faintly glowing threads. Each thread would shimmer intermittently, its brightness waxing and waning with invisible currents of chemistry and signal. Together they would form an immense yet delicate body, occupying a three-dimensional volume rather than a single outline. This is the anatomy of a luminous network that behaves like a single entity while lacking a central form, an organism defined more by its connections and its light than by conventional morphology. The abyssal environment shapes not only the biology of the radiant beast, but also the physics of its light. Seawater absorbs and scatters photons, with red wavelengths disappearing first and blue totaling the greatest reach. By emitting primarily in the blue-green range, the tendrils maximize the distance over which their signals can travel. Even so, at these depths, a single flash from a microscopic vesicle would be visible only a few meters away. The network compensates through massive redundancy, aligning countless vesicles so that their combined output becomes detectable over far greater distances. Consider a section of tendril 50 meters long. Along its length, millions of luminous vesicles may fire in sequence, forming a wave that travels upward. Each vesicle shines for only a fraction of a second, yet the wave persists for tens of seconds as it marches along the filament. To an observer perpendicular to the tendril, this would appear as a rising pulse, a streak of radiance that ascends through darkness. If many tendrils are coordinated, waves can intersect and overlap, creating complex patterns reminiscent of interference in optics, though driven by biology rather than electromagnetism alone. The mechanism of coordination likely involves both chemical diffusion within the matrix and electrical potentials across cell membranes. Some deep-sea bacteria are known to conduct electrons across significant distances through specialized structures. The filaments of the radiant beast may exploit similar pathways, allowing rapid signal propagation without the need for fully developed nervous systems. Small voltage changes could trigger bioluminescent reactions in adjoining cells, creating a cascade of activation much like a stadium where spectators raise lights in sequence. From a functional perspective, the light may serve several purposes simultaneously. First, it provides a means of monitoring structural integrity. When the network experiences mechanical strain due to currents or landslides, mechanosensitive regions might release characteristic flashes that propagate along affected branches. The rest of the network, sensing these patterns, could adjust growth or reinforce specific junctions by depositing more matrix material. Second, the light acts as a lure for free-swimming organisms. Small animals attracted to the glow may approach the tendrils, where sticky mucus sheaths and microscopic cilia capture and direct them toward nutrient processing sites. Third, and perhaps most intriguingly, the patterns encode information about external conditions that would otherwise remain localized. Changes in temperature, pH, or dissolved oxygen at one point in the lattice can be translated into distinct rhythms of bioluminescent pulses. These rhythms travel through the network, allowing distant segments to anticipate environmental shifts. In an ecosystem where physical distances are extreme but change is slow, such preemptive coordination may confer a significant advantage in resource allocation and survival. Fluid dynamics play a role as well. Tendrils that rise high above the seafloor encounter different flow regimes than the anchored base. Currents at those levels can carry emitted photons farther horizontally before they are absorbed. The network may orient its vertical branches preferentially into prevailing flows, maximizing the horizontal spread of its signals. Over time, this would create luminous corridors where pulses travel along the direction of deep currents, effectively transforming the network into a gigantic slow-motion display whose language is written in drifting light. Any photons emitted in the abyss also carry heat, albeit an exceedingly small amount. While negligible for individual vesicles, when integrated across the enormous surface area of a mature network, the total energy release becomes measurable. Local water masses surrounding active sections of the beast may warm by a tiny fraction of a degree. This minute thermal anomaly could influence microscale circulation patterns, perhaps creating weak convective cells that feed fresh chemicals to the matrix. In this way, light production and fluid motion form a subtle feedback loop. Finally, the presence of a large, coherent, luminous structure has implications for how we interpret observational data from deep ocean sensors. Instruments designed to study faint natural light often assume that sources are point-like and transient, such as individual organisms or reactions in sinking detritus. In contrast, the radiant beast produces extended patterned emissions over large volumes. Recognizing these signatures requires revisiting the assumptions behind historical recordings. Some unexplained glows noted during early deep-sea experiments may not have been noise or artifacts, but glimpses of this vast bioluminescent architecture quietly operating beyond the reach of cameras at the time. We upload new videos every single day, so make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what's next. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, it really helps the channel grow. Tell us in the comments what you'd like to see next. Your ideas might be in our next upload. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of our community. Stay tuned, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video.